This video is looking at the B5 topic, in particular some triple content looking at the kidney. This is the third kidney video looking at transplant versus dialysis. So a kidney transplant is the ideal solution if your kidney is not functioning properly. You'll need a donor organ which is in limited supply. It could be that you have a close relative who can donate a kidney, because we have two kidneys but we only need one to survive. In that case, we need to have good tissue matching. That's why we use a close relative. Let's go back to B3 for a minute, where we learnt that white blood cells will produce antibodies that attach to the antigens on pathogens. Now, a donor organ will have those antigens, and the white blood cells recognise that there is a foreign body present, and they'll start producing white blood cells to attack and reject that organ. In order to get over that, we take immunosuppressant drugs every day for the rest of our lives, and what that does is it suppresses the immune system so that our body doesn't reject the organ. It's good because we don't reject the organ, but it's bad because our immune system is low, so therefore we are susceptible to suffering from other diseases. Kidney transplants have good survival rates, although any operation carries with it risk because of the use of anaesthetic. And kidney transplants can last for about 8 to 9 years and definitely give a much better quality of life. Dialysis is a bit more complicated. So this is our temporary solution, but that could still be for a number of years while we're on the donor waiting list. And the blood will come out of maybe your arm and go back into your arm, and it's filtered. It's filtered to remove all of the excess urea. You might remember a product called Visking tubing, which we use to model the small intestines, and it's a semi-permeable membrane, and through the whole dialysis machine there is this network of coiled up Visking tubing, and this is where the blood travels through. So you can see it snaking its way through the dialysis machine there, and the blood goes through that on a countercurrent system with the dialysis fluid, and I'll talk more about what that means in a minute. So it's a semi-permeable membrane, so all of the substances that move out of the blood into the dialysis fluid do so by diffusion. In the dialysis fluid there is no urea at all. There is the correct glucose and mineral ion content that the blood should have. So if there is any imbalances in that respect, they will be corrected as the blood goes through the dialysis machine. So as the blood comes in on the right hand side, it's got lots and lots of urea, a high concentration of urea, and that's going to start diffusing across into the dialysis fluid. Now at this point, because the dialysis fluid has moved quite a long way through the machine, it's actually going to be quite high in urea itself, but the concentration is still higher in the blood, so it will diffuse across and go into the used dialysis fluid box. On the left hand side there, the dialysis fluid is very fresh. It's just come from the heater, and the heater is enabling it to get warm to body temperature, so there isn't heat loss from the blood, cooling the person down too dramatically. So that dialysis fluid there is really pure. There's no urea in it at all, and that's where this countercurrent system works, where the dialysis fluid is going one way, the blood is going the other way, because that blood towards the end of that tubing, that Visking tubing, is going to be very low in urea. So to get the last little bit out, it goes past that fresh dialysis fluid with no urea in it, keeps that concentration gradient so that the urea moves out of the blood from high concentration to low concentration. Like I said, in that dialysis fluid there is the correct glucose, the correct mineral ions, everything that should be in the blood is correct. So there might even be a slight diffusion back into the blood from the dialysis fluid if anything is at an imbalance. But hopefully it's just the movement of urea, and this is cleansing the blood, cleaning it out. Good things about it is that obviously it keeps your urea coming out of your blood while you're waiting for the transplant, but you could be hooked up to this for a good few hours. You could be going back maybe every 5 days, so it's really life-changing having to go for dialysis. Like I said before, the dialysis fluid is formulated to ensure that it's got all of the correct components of your blood. So it's just the urea that removes from your blood with that countercurrent system to ensure it's as efficient as possible. It's important to remember that if that blood runs through the dialysis fluid too quickly, through the machine too quickly, then not all the urea will be removed. And if the blood goes too slowly, then you'll be sat there for longer than you need to be. So let's look at an evaluate question. This is a nice way to lay out an evaluate question. We've got transplants, dialysis, advantages and disadvantages for each. Now it's important to say here that you can only get 1 mark if you say something and then say the inverse of it again. So say for example I said overall a kidney transplant is cheaper for the NHS, and then I try and make my second point as overall kidney dialysis is more expensive for the NHS. That's really just 1 mark because all I'm doing is saying the inverse of what I've already said. So let's have a look at some advantages then. Kidney transplant, much better quality of life. You can go and have those long holidays without needing to go for dialysis. Overall, it is cheaper for the NHS. So it is one cost of an operation, but compared to the repeated visits for dialysis, it is a lot cheaper. Disadvantages, and make it clear that you're writing about disadvantages, is that you have to take the immunosuppressant drugs, so you've got an increased risk of infection. There's a massive shortage of organ donors, and the kidney won't last forever. It lasts about 8 to 9 years on average. Any operation carries risk, so that's going on under anaesthetic, having the operation. And then kidney dialysis, sometimes we feel like we're repeating ourselves a little bit from the advantages and disadvantages, but again in the inverse way that we did in transplants. So it's available to anyone because there's no shortage of dialysis fluid. You don't need to have the immunosuppressant drugs. Disadvantages, we've talked already about the impact of dialysis on your everyday life, and we've talked about the expense for the NHS. In addition to that, we can also say that a patient who is undergoing dialysis has to limit their salt and protein intake because this will reduce the amount of amino acids that they're producing, and therefore how regularly they need to have the dialysis, and the amount of urea they've got as well. Hope you found that useful. Thank you.